Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker. And in this video, I want to return to the issue of those who try to leave the Jehovah's Witness organization without creating any fuss, but who instead find themselves hunted down and punished by their elders. I've already interviewed people on this channel who have had just that experience, and I'm delighted to welcome to the channel yet another with that experience, Ben Rancourt, who joins me from British Columbia, somewhere up north, at a very early time in the morning. So hello, Ben, welcome to the channel.
Hey, great to be here, Lloyd.
Thank you for squeezing me into your schedule, albeit through what looks like some amount of sleep deprivation. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you have had an extraordinary story, and it involves a degree of harassment and intimidation by your elders. Mm-hmm. Before we get to that, maybe it would be useful if we review how you came to be involved with Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place.
Okay, good. So like a lot of people, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, so that's in the eastern part of the country. Both my parents, my mother and father, became Jehovah's Witnesses, out of the territory. My mom in particular, she was raised a strict French Catholic, and anybody in Canada will know those Catholics are very strict. And she had 13 brothers and sisters. She found herself pregnant, unwed. And that's when the Jehovah's Witnesses called on her in Ottawa. And of course, my dad was a pioneer there in Ottawa. And next thing you know, they got together and they moved to Northern Ontario. And here I came with my brother. And of course, I had my sister there. So that's how I got involved with Jehovah's Witnesses. I was born into it. And it was a rough childhood. My mom was a very heavy-duty Jehovah's Witness, and it's not until watching your channel that I began to realize I got some closure as to what happened in my childhood, because when you read those bound volumes and you see what people were going through in the 60s and 70s, you began to realize, oh my God, this is why my mom was so nuts. They thought Armageddon was on the brink. So, every weekend was the same thing. Studying the Watchtower, those 35 paragraph long Watchtower lessons. And, Armageddon was the topic. The world was going to end. And a lot of times, 3 o'clock in the morning, we could hear my parents arguing, and my mother would be giving my dad heck, those kids aren't going to make it through Armageddon. And it's all your fault because you're not taking the lead. This was the kind of thing that I was hearing over and over again as a kid,
Indeed. I can imagine it being very unsettling, and you actually lived, I think you experienced more of that due to the age difference between us, because I was born in 79, sort of after the whole 75 thing, but still in a way feeling reverberations into the 80s, because I can remember, for example, being ready to go to high school, or being of the age where I could go to high school, and my parents saying, we never thought that you would even go through primary school. So there was so much expectation.
And these were the kind of discussions, not only with our family, but other families too. And the yelling and the amounts of abusive speech and violence in the house, this was happening in other kids' families as well. So I just assumed, put up with it until the new system kind of thing. But it was terrible. And my sister, she was 9 years older than me. She was like my mother almost, because my mom was so crazy. I could always count on my sister. But she went through a lot too. My mom was really hard on her. I remember her coming home lots and talking about the way some of the elders would treat her. It was terrible, and of course, when she turned 18, she left and went to Ottawa, and just kind of left me and my brother there alone in the house. So that's when things started to deteriorate. I wasn't baptized. I was an unbaptized publisher, but I was one of those kids that, sat at the front row, always had his hand up. I was into it. The meetings was almost my little escape to get away from things that were happening at home. But by the time I got to be a teenager, I started to see a lot of the double standards in the hall, and that's what happens when you're a young kid reaching out. Then the elders start putting pressure on you. We seen you with this kid. What were you doing? I was constantly in the back room. Meanwhile, other kids were just doing whatever they wanted to do. So it wasn't long before I got called before the elders. And I remember that I was at the mall. I was in an arcade. My dad came and got me. And by this time, my dad was inactive. But he said, Ben, the elders want to talk to you. I said, well, I don't want to go up there. He said, come on, be a man. And remember, I'm only like 14 years old. So I went up there. I didn't know what to expect. But these three guys started asking me lots of weird questions. And before you know it, I was being disassociated. They wouldn't let my dad go in there, so he was upset. I mean, a lot of witnesses, I don't think they realize the judicial process until it starts to happen.
Why were you disassociated by your elders as a teenager?
Well, at that time, so when you probably recall, an unbaptized publisher, you were treated like you were baptized.
Oh, so you weren't even baptized yet?
No, I was an unbaptized publisher. So they announced me from the platform as, bad association and no longer, So I started going back to the meetings, but of course nobody was talking to me. And I thought, well, the hell with this. If they're not talking to me, I'm out of here. And so I actually went from bad to worse. As a teenager, basically I was cut loose, and my mother, she had no control over me and my brother. My brother ended up going to prison. And I got involved with, mild drugs and partying. And that's the way
I just want to understand more what's kind of pushed you down this path. So you're in the arcade, your dad comes and says, the elders want to meet with you. And before you know it, you're being basically, it sounds like you're being told that the congregation doesn't want anything more to do with you. That has, by what you're telling me, knock-on effects with your family and sends you on a self-destructive spiral. What were the reasons given by the elders for this harsh treatment? Well,
I mean, they didn't like the kids I was hanging around with, and the fact that I was going to an arcade and this kind of stuff. They didn't like my behavior. And the fact I was trying to say was, well, half the kids in the hall are doing that anyway.
What's wrong with going to an arcade?
Yeah, you're just not good spiritual association. You're not applying things the way that Jehovah's Witnesses want. And
but to punish you for that, and with the result that it sends you spiraling off into even worse association, to the point where you're experimenting with drugs, did you say?
Yeah, that's right. Well, because now I was free, and the condition at home, like my parents, we were, the Bible says, a boy on the loose will bring his parents shame. Well, that's the way we were. I mean, it was bizarre. She'd bitch and moan about all the things we should be doing about the truth, but and through the week we were just free, cut loose, And my dad was inactive, wasn't doing much. So when I stopped going to the meetings and hanging around, I just hang around with worldly kids. And I was, at this time, I started grade 9 at high school in Sault Ste. Marie. So you go from grade 8, a small little public school, to a great big high school. I wasn't prepared for that. I went from this sheltered Jehovah's Witness life with a kind of a nutcase mom to hanging around with these kids at school, and it got me into trouble, The interesting thing is once I started reaching out for help at school, guidance counselors and stuff, they could see, this is a good kid. He's trying hard, but he's getting into trouble. And they were trying to help me. But the one thing I would never discuss is Jehovah's Witnesses. I would never talk about Jehovah because I was afraid that was a line I never wanted to cross. You don't want to upset Jehovah. All these other people, well, they'll get straightened out in the new system, but don't talk about Jehovah. So I had lots of opportunities for good people to help me as a kid. But I never opened up about what the real problem was. This situation, being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, was a problem, But anyway, as time went on, I ended up being around 19 years old. And all of a sudden, Jehovah's Witnesses changed that rule where you could talk to ones who had been disassociated if they weren't baptized, you know. So my sister was excited, and she called me and she said, "Hey, you know, Ben, they've changed this rule." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." Next thing you know, I get this pioneer elder knocking at my door. And, you know, at this time I had an apartment, I had a girlfriend, things were going okay. And this guy comes and starts to study with me. And, you know, of course, at the time I was listening to the news and was talking about the Great Lakes being polluted and our world being, you know, going down the drain. And I thought, you know, I got to get myself back into the truth. I mean, before Armageddon comes. So I took it serious. I started studying. And, you know, again, before long, my relationship with this girl broke up. And now looking back at it, I look at it, I was changing. I was becoming, you know, quite frankly, an asshole, you know, and that's what Christian brothers end up becoming, because all of a sudden this brother was putting pressure on me saying, you know, you got to try and get your girlfriend to study. It means her life. And, you know, I talked to her about these things, and to her, I was just being weird, but I was taking it serious. So once we broke up, I ended up going out west. To make a long story short, I headed to British Columbia, and my full intention was to become a Jehovah's Witness. I seen a brother on the street corner. I got talking to him. Next thing you know, I was going to the meetings in Penticton, British Columbia, and that's where I met my wife, Debby. We got liking each other. Bang, we got married, and off we went. And I started taking things really serious, you know. But right away there was a problem because, of course, like lots of young Jehovah's Witnesses, we ended up fooling around before we got married. And this was a problem because, you know, right away Deb's like, well, I'll move in with you. And I was like, no, you can't do that. You got to go home. I mean, my parents are coming for the wedding. Everybody's coming. Let's just keep this quiet and we'll get married. And that's what we did. But of course, 6 months later, my conscience started to bother me so much that I said to Deb, you know, we got to go talk to the brothers. And I find out now she wasn't that bothered by it. She was like, I don't understand why you're doing it, but I'll follow your lead. And so I went and talked to the elders, and that was my second encounter with the judicial committee. And of course, they met with us, and they were nice. They didn't disfellowship us, but they took all our privileges away. And, you know, here you got a guy that's commenting 2 or 3 times a paragraph and very involved with the congregation, and everything just stopped. So they all knew what the problem was. And, of course, I find out now lots of couples fooled around before they got married and kept it secret the whole time. But not Ben here, you know, he had to be honest, and it set me back, you know.
Sure. So despite this setback, I'm assuming that, you know, that you kind of came boomeranging back at some point. So did things improve from there?
Well, yeah, and you know, to be fair, this was a good congregation. There were some good people there. So I just took it as a, you know, they always say you're being refined, eh? So I started moving forward. Debbie and I decided, hey, let's move. We moved to a small, we're always moving, you know, moved to a small congregation, a couple hours away. Looked like we were going to make a fresh start. And I'm telling you, Lloyd, we weren't there very long. It was one of these small, quacky congregations. There was lots of problems. And I'm off working, trying to work hard in the congregation. Meanwhile, while I'm there, one of the elders' sons is trying to steal my wife from me. You know, and here I had joined this organization thinking everybody was here to support one another. And this was and that was one of the main things I wanted to be a brother for, is I thought we could really count on one another. But here this guy's trying to steal my wife. So that ended up being a big commotion. The other elders got involved, but they were all fighting amongst themselves too. It was just bizarre. But in the end, it got straightened out. This brother denied most of everything, of course, and Deb was confused, but she, you know, we worked it all out. But the weird thing was, you know, within a month, they appointed me a ministerial servant. Out of all this going on, they're like, you know, because I was trying, Lloyd. And that's what happened from there. I became a servant, started giving talks. And because of that, we kept moving around, and I just kept getting reappointed as a ministerial servant everywhere we went because I came with a good letter of recommendation. So, I was counting. We've been in at least a dozen different congregations across this country, and I've served in lots of them. So it's given me kind of a unique perspective in some of these halls. And I remember saying somebody said to me, there's problems in every congregation. And I said, well, that's exactly my point. I've been in a lot of halls, and everywhere you go, it's the same problems. Most of the elders, all their kids are disfellowship. They haven't spoken to their kids in years. And there's all this internal pressure. And this is what I started to notice over the years, and it was just getting me down, So anyway, how this culminated, if you want me to keep going here, is we eventually had our first daughter, Autumn. And I said to my wife, I'm going to have to finish some kind of training, a trade here, because, I got to raise some kids. It's funny when you have a kid, all of a sudden you start thinking differently. And so we made the big trip and moved from British Columbia all the way back to Ontario because my dad was a stonemason there. And I thought, well, I'll finish my training as a mason, which we did. And eventually ended up back in Ottawa.
Not a Freemason.
No, not a Freemason, a stonemason. Although I will tell you,
some of my viewers getting excited there. Like, oh.
Well, I'll tell you, what's amazing is finding out all this stuff about the connection with the Masonic Lodge and all that now is weird because, as a stonemason, I've worked with some prominent stonemasons in this country. And, that subject comes up a lot. It's always people say, oh, are you a mason?
Any evidence of a really hard link. I know that there's lots of kind of suggestions with the what's the word, with the symbols that he used.
Right.
But I guess to get too excited about it, I'd need some kind of hard evidence of a link, and so far I've not seen any. But yeah.
Oh, right. Just a bizarre connection. Yeah. But anyway, I can't tell you how hard it was for me at that time. Learning a trade, trying to fit in with these guys that work. Stonemasons are rough, tough guys. They just don't give you their trade for nothing. So you kind of got to make friends with them a bit. And I'm a ministerial servant at that time, giving public talks, really involved in the hall. I was literature servant, for a congregation that served 3 different languages. I was busy, plus raising my girls. By this time, we had a second girl. There's a lot of pressure. And I remember being at work one day. I was building a big stone wall, doing a beautiful job, and the owner says, you're doing such a great job. I'm going to give you a big fatty. He thought, a joint, eh? And I said, oh, no, that's okay. But by the end of the day, for some reason, I just said, I'll take it. I needed something. I was stressed out. And so for several months, I started using this stuff. And of course, my conscience started to bother me again. These elders never had to chase me down. I was the guy that would go and confess everything. And so finally, a long story short, after some time, I went and talked to them. And of course, I was removed as a ministerial servant, and a judicial committee was formed. This was another occasion. And this time I was disfellowshipped. It was weird, in the judicial room, they were joking around a bit. But when they called me back in and said, we've disfellowshipped you, it was so cold. Here were brothers that I hung around with and cared, and it just changed. Bang, it was cold. And I remember the presiding overseer said, Ben, we're going to need your blood card. And that really shocked me. I had to take my blood card out and slap it on the table, eh? So they disfellowshipped me, and so I'm going to the meetings now. 8 months had passed in disfellowship. Nobody's talking to me. And my sister, remember I told you, she's like my mother. She was so close to me. And she was always traveling all over the world for work. Anyway, I remember this meeting, we hadn't talked to each other, and she looked at me from across the hall, and she kind of just gave me a wink, Felt good, And she took off on this flight, never came back. She got killed over in India. So it was hard on me, and it was hard on the congregation, a big funeral, because she got killed with another sister over there. So this whole process goes through. Nobody talks to me at the funeral. And after this is all finished, another 5 months goes by before they decide to reinstate me, if you can imagine. On the very same night that they decide to reinstate me, they say, Ben Rancourt is now one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He takes a pause and he says, Louis Bovary is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So this is my brother-in-law. So the very night I'm reinstated, they disfellowship him. So I couldn't even talk to my sister. So, you know, there was just no closure. And of course, by this, it was just terrible, you know. So anyway, 5 months later, finally they decide to reinstate me. It was just a tough time. I fought hard to get off this pot and just kind of straighten out my life, you know, but there was never any really closure on what happened with my sister there. So, you know, a number of months went by and Deb could tell, she could tell I was down. We had made the decision. She said, well, why don't we move back to British Columbia? I said, well, you know, if you can find me a job there, we're gone. I mean, by the end of the night, Deb had a number of a stonemason on my desk and I called him, had a job. So we headed back out west. But I'll tell you this, I could just never get over this thing with my sister. And I started to slowly use the pot again, you know, the marijuana. And so again, you know, now by this time we're on Vancouver Island. And my conscience again starts to bother me. So I went and talked to the elders again. And of course, they have to form another judicial committee. And I explained the whole situation to them. I was really down about it. I said, you know, brothers, I said, what happened with his sister and the whole bit. So they decided not to disfellowship me, but just to reprove me. But I could tell again, it was this cold situation. There was, and again, there was one elder in there. You could tell he was upset. He wanted to disfellowship me. And that again was a point where I started to realize, do these guys even really care about me? It's just like, they're just sitting there interrogating me. Do they really understand what I'm going through? But you know, Lloyd, once I got out of there, I was filled with zeal. I thought, you know, this is my chance. Jehovah's given me another opportunity. And I just put my nose to the grindstone. And within a year or so, I remember they came to me and our coordinator said, you know, Ben, we can really tell Jehovah's Spirit is upon you, so we're going to appoint you a ministerial servant. I was happy. I really thought Jehovah was blessing my efforts. But, you know, once they appointed me a servant again, it didn't take long before things started to bother me. You know, these double standards in the hall. Like, I'll give you an example. One time I was sitting in a pub. I always used to go to the pub after work and have a beer or two and just rethink about my work and sometimes do some paperwork or return a few emails. And an elder walked in with a friend of his. These elders, they never hang around with people in their own congregation. They've got friends somewhere else. And they noticed me sitting there, and they're buying these big jugs of beer at the counter and leaving with them. And of course, next thing you know, I get called in the back room. You know, Brother Rancourt, we noticed you sitting in a pub by yourself. It was always this kind of stuff I'd get dragged in the back room for, you know. And again, the pressure, my kids by this time are teenagers. And, you know, I'm trying to tell them not to hang around with kids at school. And we're putting them in homeschooling, you know, so paranoid and protecting our kids from the world. Meanwhile, I'm out at work hanging around with these people, trying to make a living. And, you know, that wears on a guy. You feel ashamed. You're like, it's like a double standard for even me, eh? So, yeah, eventually the pressure got down on me. We started having a few problems at home. And the next thing you know, I was deleted as a ministerial servant again. I was just having problems in the congregation. Eh? So, and by this time, my oldest daughter, Autumn, you know, she starts meeting a young brother, and they spring it on me that they want to get married. You know, it's tough for a dad, but I mean, we couldn't really complain. I mean, Debbie and I got married young too. So here's your daughter getting married, starting her new life. We had one left at home, and I said to Deb, we need to make a change. I said, I'm hearing all this work up in northern BC. Let's head up there. A new congregation, give us a new start. And so, of course, by the time we get up here, I could see this congregation needed a lot of help. There was problems here. There wasn't many attending. And I thought, hey, this is a good opportunity for me to rekindle maybe get reappointed and things will get going here. But I could tell you, Lloyd, out of all the congregations I had been in, this one took the cake. There was some real problems here, Like, I'll give you an example. We pop in here, they read the monthly
Did another
accounts
elder
report.
try to take your wife? Because that's what the competition is so far.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, through our whole life, we've been married 27 years now. We've had our problems, but I've seen so many witness couples, break up. They're on their second or third marriage. Debbie and I have tried hard. We've tried to put the principles into place that they showed us, and we've stuck together. And yet I've had so many witnesses try to break us apart. It's almost like they're jealous. It's just crazy, But anyway, this congregation, like an example, so we get here and, they read the monthly accounts report, right? This one, they read it and they say, monthly accounts report, we have $299,000 some odd dollars in the account. And I remember Debbie and I, we looked at each other. It just was odd. You don't hear that, eh?
Mm.
And there was all kinds of other problems. There was one guy in the hall, he was kind of doing apostate type stuff, and he was after me too, eh? In fact, he put a couple seeds in my mind, eh? But I'll tell you, it wasn't even a few months. All of a sudden, everybody got excited because the society sent a special pioneer couple here. And so everybody thought, hey, this is great. We're going to get the spiritual need we needed. And this special pioneer couple, his wife was awesome, but this brother, he was here. It was all business. He was here for one reason and one reason only, and it was to get that money. And within 6 months, they had an announcement on the platform saying, we'd like to have a resolution to send $299,000 to the worldwide work. And of course, everybody puts up their hand and bang, off it's gone. I'm not kidding. Within 2 weeks, this guy and his wife was reassigned to another congregation.
What year was this, by the way?
This was late 2017, early 2018. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, because that kind of more or less fits in with the stealth tithing arrangement.
Yeah.
Where they had to hand over their surplus to Watchtower and set up the regular payments. So it could be to do with that as well. But it sounds like this special pioneer might have been a bit of an enforcer.
I think. Yeah. And so it was interesting too, because the money was in the account because they sold a hall about an hour away. And the local brothers here didn't want to get rid of the money because they thought, well, someday we might have to build a new hall. But they didn't know all this inside stuff that was going on.
Mm.
Anyway,
this just built the hall. Yeah.
But this special pioneer couple was reassigned, and it upset the congregation because spiritually speaking, they were helping, his wife especially, but they just moved them out and they sent a new couple here from straight out of the school for Christian couples. But this wasn't a young couple. This guy was, late 50s, and he was a bully. And his wife was real hard-nosed pioneer type sister too, right? And this is when things started to change for me because I was really trying, Lloyd. I believe I wanted to be a Jehovah's Witness, but this guy, he was shocking. I mean, the things he would come up with, and he was hard on me, bullying and constantly pressuring. You got to pioneer. You got to do this. You got to do Armageddon's coming. Like he was like my mom, And our territory is very rural, so sometimes you'll have to drive an hour or so to get to a territory. And he just talking all the time about this stuff you would hear. And it was pressuring me to get more involved. And that's what I was doing. I mean, I should have been taking care of my wife and kid more, but instead I'm just focusing on the pioneering because we all thought Armageddon is coming. But what really got me going was all this pressure started to get me down again. And I wasn't using any drugs, but I started turning to alcohol. I was drinking more and more beer. And, Deb was concerned about me, and she knew I was hanging around with this guy quite a bit. So she approached him and said, his name was Gord, and said, hey, Gord, do you think you could talk to Ben a little bit? He's having some issues. Well, bang, next thing you know, we got two elders at our door, as they couldn't figure out what was going on with me. I was just down. I was just depressed, you know. And next thing you know, he says, you know, Ben, we have to form a judicial committee. I said, well, for what? He said, for drunkenness. So the next thing you know, they are forming this judicial committee. And I got to tell you, it hit me hard, you know, when I was over at this brother's place every day, just crying and saying, what's going on? And he would say, don't worry about it, Ben. We're going to have a nice meeting. We're going to go over some articles. It's going to be encouraging. So I started to relax a bit. But I'll tell you, Lloyd, when I got in that judicial meeting, it was different. The two brothers on the side were holding their head in shame. One, I know now, he completely disagreed with the meeting to begin with. The other one, I find out now, he was getting drunk at the same time that they were having the judicial committee for me. And this bully elder at the end, his face beat red, like it's like he enjoyed this thing. And he started asking me some really deep questions. They wanted me to go way back to the beginning. I don't know what they were fishing for. But I had been through this process enough, and I just thought, you know, Benny, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut and say things properly, or you're going to get disfellowshipped here. So I just kind of went along with them. I told them what they wanted to hear, and they let me off the hook. But at the end of the meeting, he said, we've decided not to disfellowship you, Ben, but all of your privileges are removed. I mean, that's the way he talked. Like it was vindictive, eh? But, you know, what does Ben do? I just got out of there and put my nose to the grindstone and worked hard. And, you know, 6 months later, I got my privileges back. I could comment again. You know, this is a story of my life with these guys. And we were pioneering, you know, regular auxiliary pioneering in the territory after that. And all of a sudden, this couple moves in from back east, inactive couple. And this bully elder, he decides to take this couple under his wing for some reason. You know, he couldn't talk enough about these two. Anyway, one day we're in service, field service, and we stopped over at their house for, you know, a break after service. And in the corner, what do I notice there? A couple little marijuana plants growing. And I needed to change my clothes. I was going to go in the washroom, but it's for some reason this brother kept directing me to one room in particular. And I said, okay. And what do I see there on a table was a little marijuana pipe. So I thought, this is kind of weird, you know. And that night was the meeting, Tuesday meeting. And this couple gets announced as auxiliary pioneers. So I called this bully elder in the back room and I said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute, you know? And I said, what's the society's stance on medical marijuana anyway? And his face got all red again. And he says, you're talking about this couple? And I said, I hadn't mentioned their name, but I said, well, now that you mention it, yeah. He says, oh, don't worry about it.
That name. Yeah, interesting
he says, don't worry about it. It's fine. We've talked to the society. It's all good. Well, for once, I lost it. I was like, well, this isn't good to me, man. I said, you guys disfellowshipped me for smoking marijuana, and I couldn't talk to my sister again. I was upset, you know. And he didn't like that, and I just walked out. That was the beginning of the end for me, you know, and I just was upset. I thought, this is not right what's going on here. You can't just do that to people. I was really down about the whole bit.
When did this happen, by the way? How recently?
This happened about mid-2018, right. You know, so just last year.
So middle of last year. Okay.
Yeah, started to go down, you know, around about that time period. But that's when, you know, I just started kind of shrinking back at that point. I basically, the best way I can describe it is the wind was just taken out of my sails. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I had come to the conclusion that I wasn't going to make it. You know, and around the same time, we got a new circuit overseer. I mean, there's so much I could tell you about this. It's not funny, but they start sending these new circuit overseers around now, and they're all young. They're younger than me, man. They're young guys, nice guys, but you know, they're just not in touch with reality. And this last one they sent here, it was all about we're looking for the rightly disposed. That's what he kept talking about, you know, in his talks. And we're out in the field service with him. We took them for lunch, and so who are we looking for, Ben? We're looking for the rightly disposed. So you could clearly see what he was getting at. Like, they don't want you to get into any conversations with people at the door. They just want you to go about and do your ministry. Any pressure, they're not rightly disposed, you know. So I started to think, well, you know, I've been having so many problems. Maybe I'm not rightly disposed. You know, if I can just get the girls into the paradise, I'd be happy. This is the way I was thinking, you know. It's not good, but that's the way they were making me feel. I had given up. And it was around that time, you know, I was always plunking around on the internet. I like outdoor stuff, so I like YouTube videos of outdoor stuff and what have you. And I started seeing stuff about the Australian Royal Commission. And I remember what came across online was Jeffrey Jackson testifies. That's what caught my eye. And I was like, right on, let's watch this one, you know. We're going to see him tear these guys apart. That's what I was thinking. And what I saw shocked me. I just could not believe it. And it really threw me for a loop, you know. And it was right around then that this Watchtower came out. And there's an article in here on all about honesty. And I'll tell you, Lloyd, I study these magazines. I study these magazines thoroughly. You know how early they come out. So I'm always studying them months ahead because I'm looking forward for Armageddon.
Yeah.
And this article, I was studying it. And I'll tell you, Lloyd, I really beat myself up over this article. I kept thinking to myself, what am I not doing? What am I not being honest about that I'm not progressing? This is the way I was thinking. But in the meantime, I watched this thing on the Australian Royal Commission. And when I got to the meeting, and it was weird that night, that Sunday, I had to read I was the Watchtower reader. So I'm reading this article, and for once in my life, it just clicked. I thought, hey, wait a second, I'm not the guy with the problem here. It's these guys that got the problem. They're not telling me the truth. And that's what started it for me. You can ask Debby. My desk was piled up with books. I stumbled across a few channels. The first one I looked at was XJW Fifth. And it was just stumbled across an interview with an ex-elder from Australia. And I just couldn't believe. I started watching these interviews with people. That's what got me, just like what you're doing with me right now. And it started to make me realize, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not alone here. I couldn't believe what I was watching. And then, of course, I found your channel, and I was getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. I mean, I was going through every bound volume. Anything you talked about, I was checking. I even had a brother say, I saw your vehicle at the Kingdom Hall. I was going there at like 2 in the morning and checking these old publications out, because I had a key for the hall, and studying them. I mean, some of these books, it's like an old archive. They've been put in there in 1969 when it came to the literature desk. It was never taken out. With brand new books, you know. And I was checking all these quotes that you were saying, and I just realized I'm not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. This isn't the truth. And, you know, it was just, that's the way it worked for me, you know.
It shows a lot of sincerity, though, on your part to be going to those extremes. And I would obviously encourage anyone to fact check what I say and to not take what I say or what anyone else says for granted. I mean, the whole reason why I include references as much as I do is so that, you know, people can verify what I'm saying. But the fact that you were going to those lengths of driving to the Kingdom Hall to check in the Kingdom Hall library shows how sincere you were, and shows that for you, this was all about whether it's true or not. And if you make it purely about that, is this true or is it not true? It can only really lead you in one direction if you're a truly honest person, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, the other thing is, it hits if you're a sincere Jehovah's Witness, it was hitting me hard, because your whole system of life is coming apart, right? And at the start, I was still believing in Jehovah and the Bible and thinking, well, maybe these guys have just got it screwed up. And, you know, I'd be praying, please, Jehovah, if I'm going down the wrong path, you got to help me out here. I was sincere. And I remember, I'll tell you, for one morning, I'd been up all night. I just prayed to Jehovah. I said, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt here. And I decided to call the brothers again. And I mean, these two were over at my house, lickety split. And I realized within a couple of minutes, I needed to shut up because these guys had no idea what I was talking about. And there's no way you're going to convince them otherwise. I mean, I had been looking at all this evidence, and for once in my life, I realized how clueless these guys, and one of your videos, you said, they're just a bunch of guys. And I realized, yeah, that's all these guys are. They're just carpet cleaners and low IQ dummies that have been bullying me my whole life. They're the same in every Kingdom Hall, right?
And it's astonishing how easy it is to surpass their knowledge of their own religion by... Once you do give yourself permission to do research, you can end up very easily knowing more than an elder knows about their own religion, to the point where if you do try having a conversation, which I wouldn't recommend because it can cause you more problems than it's worth, but if you try having a conversation, they're just going to start floundering really quickly because you're talking about things that they've just never exposed themselves to.
Yeah. And so, Lloyd, for me, this is a key point again on this. You know, it comes back to the shunning and all that too, because like I have had so many dealings with the elders, but this dealing on this issue has really shocked me because like if you walk into the Kingdom Hall and say, you know, I've committed adultery or something, you're going to get punished, but they'll help you. They'll try and help. But when you walk in there and say, you know, I've got some doubts or I'm questioning this, I mean, they circle the wagons and cut you off right now. And that's what started to happen to me. I went from auxiliary pioneering and working my butt off in the hall to stopping just like that. I mean, I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, when I started finding this stuff out, I said to Deb, I can't knock at one more door. I just can't do it. How can I go and knock at a door with all this stuff out there about the child molestation, the whole bit? It just was disgusting. But what really shocked me is how people whom you think cared about you just turn their back on you just like right now. And I worry about Debby now too. That's the big thing. And that's what's happened here is that this organization has taken free speech away from people. That is the problem. You can't ask any questions. You can't freely talk. I mean, we just came across a situation here where there's a young girl in this area. She's been hiding for a while now. It's every time you turn over a new leaf, you see young people and people in general that are just living in fear because they can't speak out, and it's not right.
Are you able to divulge the impact that your awakening has had on you and Debby, and also on your relationship with your daughters, and also the extent to which the elders kind of came after you?
Yeah, so I mean, with Debby, it was a tough one. I mean, so grateful that she's so supportive. You know, Deb's a beautiful woman. She's been a loyal wife, and she's a great girl. That's the bottom line here. I married a good wife, and I've tried hard. I haven't been perfect, but I tried hard, and she could see that. And when I first started talking to her, I was cautious. But I remember her saying to me, well, you'll never take me away from Jehovah. And I didn't want to do anything, but I was just trying to tell her. But it didn't take long. She's a smart girl, and she started checking into things too. And it doesn't take much before you realize, hey, this is all a bunch of baloney. And the thing is, made me realize is a lot of things along our way, Deb was thinking differently about it, but she went along with it because she was being a loyal wife and supporting me as the head of the house, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that she's enjoying now is she's free as a woman. And I told her, you're just as important as me. You have the right to your future too, you know? What's important to you? So anyway, regardless, it didn't take long. We decided to make a trip to Vancouver Island to talk to our kids, because the thing that scared me the most is So this is interesting. So just picture this. All of a sudden, my daughter sends me a picture of her and her husband, and he's sporting a beard. So it kind of threw me off, because at the very same time, an elder in our hall is giving 2 talks in 1 month about brothers should be shaving. He says, come on, brothers, you should at least shave. It was weird. And then all of a sudden I get this picture with my son-in-law sporting a beard. And I said to Deb, I said, I think they might be waking up. And it feared me that my poor kids couldn't talk to me if something was bothering them. So I said, I got to go down and at least explain to them what's happening. But the whole trip down there, you know, I had been on Twitter and that, but I was using an alias, and I hadn't opened up yet. And we had decided I wasn't going to go too crazy with the girls, just tell them, you know, we're not going to meetings anymore, blah, blah, blah. But we get down there. The reason we had gone down there, too, in addition, was there was a wedding going on. So picture this. I'm at a wedding with like over 200 Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm awake. And I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I mean, you can't have a meaningful conversation with these people. It all comes back to, well, thank God the new system's almost here, or something like that. So I started saying little things that got things going. And next thing you know, the next day, my son-in-law's father said, Ben, we got to talk. And so we sat down, and he really pressured me. He was like, tell me what's going on, Ben. And I said, well, I don't really...
This is because you've been talking openly, wedding with people.
Yeah. He's like, I need to know what's bothering you. You know, I think it surprised him more than anything. Finally, I said, okay, look, I'll talk to you, but if you don't like what I'm saying, let's just end the conversation and pretend it never happened. And you know, with friends, that's what you do. You know, and I thought I could trust him. And I started opening up to him about everything, and he was just listening. He even started crying. So I thought, this is going good, you know. And he even said to me, he said, you know, I would never shun my kids. He told me that. By the next day, he had talked to my girls and convinced them not to talk to me anymore, or at least to my oldest daughter. So he did a complete reverse course. So I never got a chance to talk to my daughter about it, really. I talked to my youngest a little bit, but I mean, I don't want to pressure them. I'm just happy now. I know they're safe, but at least they know where I stand. And I feel good that down the road, if they wake up, they know they can always come and talk to their parents. That's what's important to me.
But as of now, both of your daughters are shunning you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Especially my oldest one is not, they cut us right off, you know. They don't want, and that's the thing that hurts the most, not only with them, but other people, is they don't even want to know an explanation. You know, if I had a good friend in the truth that all of a sudden just said, I don't want to do this anymore, I just can't see myself not saying, well, heck, what the heck is going on? I'd want to know why. But nobody wants to know why, and we train them that way, so I can't really blame the poor kids, you know. But at least they know where we stand.
But how does it feel? Because kind of one of the reasons, one of the main drivers behind my activism, or at least the speed with which I was able to kind of get out of the organization, was knowing that our first child was on her way. And, you know, we even named her Jessica Liberty, because it was like she was our opportunity to draw a line in the sand and say, no more indoctrination in our family.
Yeah.
And I'm paranoid as it is of any kind of suggestion of her receiving any indoctrination through my JW family members. I can only imagine how traumatic it must be, not only for your daughter to kind of grow up and shun you because of this religion, but also to kind of have to process the fact that it's because I raised her in that religion that this is happening. So how do you kind of reconcile all that as a father?
Well, that is one of the biggest things. I mean, I've been really ashamed of myself. That's one of the biggest things that's taken me here is, I mean, I raised them in the truth. I wasn't always the best dad, but I tried the best I could. And yeah, I mean, I'm ashamed of the fact that I prevented them from getting a good education and making good friends at school and secluding them while I was off, hanging around with people at work. That bugs me. There's a lot of good principles as Jehovah's Witnesses, that all of us can use. There's positive points. So that's good for them. And I'm just hoping that down the road, they'll wake up. But yeah, it really hurts that our kids just are doing that too. We know it's what we trained them to do, but it is hurtful. It hurts us a lot that they wouldn't give us the opportunity to just say, hey, this is what we found. We don't want to be mean. We don't want to be rude. We don't want to stop Jehovah's Witnesses from being an organization. We're just, look at the evidence here. This is not the truth. And they've been lying to us our whole life, and that's the key, So yeah, that's kind of where I feel on that one. And what they're doing, shunning their mother too. Hasn't done anything but accept the facts are the same, so it's hurtful on the both. I can tell it's really bugging Deb,
Okay. And would it be fair to say that after that experience on Vancouver Island, did that facilitate your own elders coming after you in any way? Yeah.
So what happened there was, they got in touch with the elders there on Vancouver Island, and they all know me there. So that got the ball rolling, and the next thing you know, the elders here, or one elder, he called me and wanted to have a meeting, how they do it with two. And I just told him straight out, I said, listen, you're going to have to respect my space here and don't bother me again. I don't want to talk to you about these issues. And about a week later, I got a registered letter in the mail inviting me to that judicial committee. And they clearly marked on their apostasy, because they had been looking at my Twitter account. By this time, I just felt like I don't care what the consequences are anymore. I love my kids. I love everybody. There's even a lot of people I miss, but I can't do this anymore. I have to stand up for what's right. I can't continue to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses like this. I don't want to be associated with a group that's hiding this kind of stuff and treating people this way. So I can't do it anymore. And that's when I decided to put my full name on my Twitter account. And I just thought, this is who I am. If you guys want to prove to me that I'm going down the wrong path, and show me, but they can't. That's the thing, eh? So I felt so much freer.
When you met with them, you weren't saying, actually, I disassociate myself. You were telling them.
So I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they called, I said, no, I don't want to meet with you. Just leave me alone. When they sent the registered letter, I immediately went to the police station and showed it to them. They took a copy, and they went and visited the elders and told them not to bother me anymore. And then I followed it up with a registered letter of my own with legal advice, basically telling them not to bother me anymore. But they went ahead with the judicial committee anyway. It's interesting. I have a client of mine who's allowed us to park my motorhome in his driveway and stay at his house for a few weeks until we sort this mess out and get out of here. And his property backs right onto the Kingdom Wall. So right now I'm looking out the picture window of my motorhome and I'm looking at the Kingdom Wall. So we were sitting here having beer and watching this whole judicial committee go on.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things is that due to where you live, you were actually able to watch from the outside as your committee was happening. Yeah, yeah.
And I could see cars of, brothers that were friends of mine here being called in as witnesses against me. And it was just a really wild experience to view it from that angle. I had been involved in them for so many times that here I'm looking at it, and it just helped me to see what a vindictive organization this is. I mean, they've all but given up on the ministry. They just drive around aimlessly. Nobody's listening to them, but they sure put a lot of work into kicking you out. If they spend as much time trying to help people, I mean, I just don't understand that everybody's being kicked out. And so anyway, I noticed. Could you
imagine, just out of interest, could you imagine if it had been possible, striking a deal with your elders and with your, let's say, your family members, so that you don't believe Debbie doesn't believe. You don't want to be going to meetings anymore. But at the same time, you're not necessarily going to call the organization out publicly. You just want a quiet life and for all of your existing relationships to be intact. Could you, if that had been on offer, would you have accepted it?
I would have taken it, no problem, and just gone away quietly. But that's the thing, Lloyd, is I told my son-in-law, his dad, when he cornered me like that, I told him straight out, I said, listen, I just want to fade out. We just want to disappear. But I said, if you guys push me into a corner, the gloves are going to come off. And that's what they've done now. And the thing is I don't mean anybody any harm, but this isn't right. You know, and the thing is, since I've woken up, Lloyd, I've realized that my story is not unique. There's all kinds of people that have the same terrible story, some even worse. And they're being shunned, they're being ostracized. And like I said, there's a young person in our territory we just found here a few days ago. It's just disgusting what they're doing to her. And this is what's happening, all because the people are being shunned. If they didn't do the shunning, I'd just go and live my own life. Leave me alone. But anyway, since they did this whole judicial thing, I'm going to be honest, I have stepped up my activism quite a bit. I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm determined to get involved in this country. I mean, there's a dark history with Jehovah's Witnesses in Canada, long history here, and a lot of secrets being kept, you know, and a lot of people being hurt. And that's the thing that I'm finding since I've woken up is the thousands of people that used to belong to Jehovah's Witnesses that are hanging out there still being traumatized by this doomsday organization. That's the thing. And those are the people that I think really need the help. The ones that are still Jehovah's Witnesses, well, they'll have to figure it out for themselves. But in my honest opinion, especially these elders, knowing what they know and continuing on like that, to me, I find is very disgusting, you know, in my opinion.
Do you think it's possible that, because you mentioned that even before the judicial committee, you were already kind of fairly openly tweeting right by this point, and so that there was like a trail that they could follow if they wanted to. They could see if they wanted to that you were saying things against the organization. Do you think that in some ways it was kind of a preemptive strike on your part, that you felt threatened by the looming inevitability of disfellowshipping, and you were kind of almost making a preemptive strike?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I knew what was happening. And, you know, Lloyd, weeks before this whole judicial committee happened, I mean, we were getting the cold shoulder and being shunned, you know.
So you're already being treated as though you were apostates by that point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially everybody. It was a real cold shoulder they were giving us. I mean, that's the thing I'm finding out now, too, in the organization. I mean, there's kind of two slices of people. You've got that group that really tries and are you know, active. And then you've got this other slice. They come to a couple meetings a month and they go fishing on the other weekend. The elders don't bother those ones too much. It's if you're a brother or sister that's real active and you're commenting all the time and you start slowing down, you're the ones they go after. And that's what happened to us. Because once I started figuring this out, I just thought, I can't do it anymore. Just as an example, too, going back here, so remember I talked to you about that Watchtower lesson. Well, the very next week, there was another lesson, and I ended up being the reader again. And that article was all about this dumbed down literature that we have, you know, these new tracts and all that. And I've been thinking about that for a while. I thought, I mean, there's no way I would become a Jehovah's Witness with this information. You know, when I came into the truth, I studied the Live Forever book. I mean, it made sense at the time. But now they don't even have that. They've gone through 4 different books since then. Now they have, what can the Bible teach you? I mean, you know, it's just such dumbed down literature. I was ashamed going to the door with this stuff. And then on top of it, they don't really want you talking to anybody anyway. So I remember being on the platform reading that article. And, you know, when you're the Watchtower reader, you got lots of time to, in between paragraphs, to kind of look at the audience, you know. And I just thought, I can't do this. That was the last meeting I went to other than the memorial. The memorial was the last meeting, and I'll tell you, I'll never go to another one. So, you know, unless it's for observation purposes, you know.
Indeed. And you mentioned you mentioned that your experience has kind of motivated you to involve yourself more in activism, particularly activism in Canada, where there are things happening. There's the class action lawsuit, of course. Do you think that the shunning, again, is kind of a catalyst there? Because this month, in fact, I think within a few days of this video being uploaded, I'll be uploading a conversation with an expert on ostracism. And we had a really interesting conversation where he was explaining how it actually almost physically hurts when someone is shunned, and how it can impact people's behavior. And it just strikes me that the way that you responded even before your disfellowshipping, and certainly afterwards, do you think it's possible that you would be reacting in this way if shunning wasn't an issue?
No, no, absolutely not. Because, if you could just talk freely, say what's on your mind, and then the conversation's over, and then just treat each other like you would a workmate or anything like that. The same thing with the kids. Hey, this is what I believe. Well, I don't believe that. Fine. And then you end the conversation. But the way they've got things set up, and clearly what I can see now, and from my research, even reading Crisis of Conscience, I mean, it's clear to see that the main thrust of the disfellowshipping arrangement and the shunning is to prevent other people from knowing the truth. And that's the thing that bothers me. The sinister thing that bothers me is that they're not trying to protect the flock. They're trying to protect the flock from hearing the truth. And that's an infringement on people's freedom to know the truth. And that's what bothers me. So it's the same in every country. But here, for example, we've got in Canada a kingdom hall in every city, and sometimes more kingdom halls, that are preventing huge swaths of good people from exercising their freedom of speech and knowing free information. And that to me is disturbing. And it's also a problem that happens in all kinds of other groups. Before I woke up, I used to think about, in Canada, as in many countries, we've got this issue with immigration, right? And you've got these poor people that come here, and, they're Muslims or what have you. And a lot of people are upset because, what some Muslims do around the world or what have you. But you look at these groups and you can see lots of people trying to free themselves from that too, this ideology. They just want to be good people. You meet them on the street, they're happy, hardworking people, yet they got this baggage back in the background there. And, I thought, well, Jehovah's Witnesses are the same thing. You got this, you're walking around, everybody you meet, you're thinking, well, soon he's going to be destroyed at Armageddon, You go to a cafe or a restaurant, it's kind of a bizarre way to live. You're looking around, everybody around you won't be here. And until you can step back and look at things critically, you start to realize, wow, that's a really wacky way to think. And yet that's what Jehovah's Witnesses think, whether they want to realize it or not. And if you're one that takes the truth seriously, as I did, that's the way I viewed it. And yet lots of Jehovah's Witnesses, my wife even will admit this, you'll go and sit through a whole Watchtower study, and at the end I'll say, oh, so what did you get out of that? Well, I was a little tired. I'm still figuring it out. Meanwhile, I've been through the study backwards and forwards, and I talk to other brothers, and they'll be like, I just don't understand. Are the other brothers reading what I'm reading? It's like a lot of this stuff was just flying over people's heads. They weren't getting it. And that's the sad part with a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. They just go to these meetings, they study these paragraphs, they say their prayer and sing the songs, and they walk out and have lunch, and they forget about what they even read. And that's the
it's not because it's too complicated, it's because it's just nonsense. It's difficult to remember or make sense of nonsense, and that's what it is. Whereas you could learn some quite complicated things about science, but because it makes sense, you remember it, Amazing. Yeah.
And well, you can't have a normal conversation with anybody. And, like going back to this brother they sent from the society, he was one. I mean, you couldn't have a normal conversation with this guy. And some of the stuff he would come up with, I began to wonder, like, what are they teaching these guys in these schools? Because, like, I'll tell you, one time we're sitting in the car, we're driving for an hour, and there's a brother and sister sitting in the back. And the one brother, he's had real problems with depression. And I've had my issues too. Anyway, the subject of suicide comes up. because we've had a number of people kill themselves up here. It's shocking. And this guy starts going on about what they learned at the school, saying, well, you know, if you kill yourself, there's a good chance Jehovah knows and you'll get a resurrection. And I talked to another elder about it after. I said, you know, you can't talk like that when you got brother sitting in the back that's been thinking about doing that every day of his life. What's the matter with you? You're supposed to be here helping us, not talking like that. And this is the kind of thing he would do all the time. Another time, for example, there was a brother up there that was kind of gone inactive. And we would do these stakeouts, you know, same idea. You get me. We drop the sisters off at the cart, and then he'd be like, let's go stake this guy's house out, see if we can find him. This is the kind of stuff that was going on, you know.
And then eventually,
I thought it was kind of exciting at first, but.
And then eventually you ended up on the receiving end of that sort of behavior.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. It's a fascinating story. I'm sure we haven't heard the last of you. Before we conclude, I just think it would be nice if you could summarize, if you have any message for your daughters, if they're watching, what would be your message to them?
Well, what I would say to the girls is, you know, we love you and we only want what's best for you. And I just urge you to do your research. I wish I would have helped you more in that regard, but just do your research and check things out. And just always know that we'll be there for you. You know, if you have a question, we'll be there for you. Don't be afraid of that. But in the meantime, we love you. We know you're safe. And that's all I can say. We're doing what we think is right. It's not because we're trying to be mean or get back at Jehovah or the organization or anything like that. It's just not the truth. One thing that always stuck out with me was that interview you did with Penton. You know, that was a great interview. And when he said at the end, it shocked me. You asked him that same question, and he said, face the fact Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the truth. You know, just get some joy in your life and move on. And that stuck with me. It's a hard pill to swallow. You know, we all wanted to live in paradise and be free, but it's just not the truth. And there's more important things to be doing on this planet right now. Enjoy the fact that you're alive right now. That's the key, you know. And so that's what Debby and I are determined to do, is start a new life, find some joy and be happy. And they're going to see that eventually. And I'm not giving up. I'm going to help. You know, my goal in this country is to bring awareness to this organization and what it's doing to people, how it's mentally abusing people. You know, I had a meeting with a therapist. He had a 45-minute meeting scheduled with me. We talked for an hour and a half. He knew nothing about Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And this is the problem. He was shocked. He could not believe it. I gave him a link to your videos and stuff, and it's educating people as to what's going on in your own community. I mean, in this community of 3,000 people, we've got all kinds of young people that have been completely abandoned by the elders here. They're on drugs, they're listless, they don't know what to do. They're trapped, right? So that's my feeling on it anyway.
Okay. Well, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for getting up so early to talk to me and accommodating me in that way. It's been a real pleasure having you on the channel. Thank you.
Yeah. And just one more thing while I got you here too is, so just for you and when I started watching your videos, you'll get a kick out of this because, you know, I didn't know anything about the internet. So when I started watching your videos and reaching out a bit, I mean, I just thought you were some guy in your basement. You know, I had no idea you had all these followers and everything. And then when I was typing things out to you, you know, it just felt good to get things off my chest. I didn't even know if you were reading it. And finally, when you got Sasha to get a hold of me, I just couldn't believe it, you know. And the whole community, Sasha, Susan Gaskin, I mean, all of you guys have been so awesome. And that's what the key here is that, you know, don't ever think you guys aren't doing a good job, because you help me out. You're waking people up. Like I said, this young person in our area has been watching your videos, and it woke her up. People are finding this information out, and it's what's helping. And I just wanted to thank all of you. I mean, you've done a great job, Lloyd.
Wonderful. Thank you for those motivating words, Ben. Thank you very much. So viewers, you have been watching my interview with Ben Rancourt. Please don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching.